It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the world seemed to hold its breath just before the chaos of the day took over. I could hear the distant hum of traffic as I walked down the stairs, the smell of freshly brewed coffee hitting me as soon as I entered the kitchen. Jessica was there, already awake, sitting at the table with a laptop in front of her, sipping her coffee absent-mindedly. The sunlight filtering through the window caught the golden streaks in her hair, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel that rare sense of contentment I used to take for granted. We had it all: 2 beautiful kids, a comfortable house in a nice neighborhood, careers that were moving along at a steady pace. I was a software engineer, buried in lines of code and deadlines, but it was a good kind of busy. Jessica, on the other hand, was a marketing executive, a woman who effortlessly balanced the demands of her job with those of being a mother. She had this way of making everything look effortless, and I admired her for it. It wasn't always like that, but it had been for the past few years. "How was the meeting yesterday?" I asked, grabbing a piece of toast. Jessica looked up from her screen, smiling faintly. "Good. Just the usual stuff. You know how it goes." I nodded, not really needing to hear more. I knew her job was demanding, but she thrived on it. It was part of the reason I never questioned her late nights at work, the frequent trips downtown, or the constant flow of emails and messages. Our kids, Lily and Ben, were still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of how perfect our lives seemed from the outside. A soft laugh escaped my lips as I thought about how they fought over the smallest things, their bickering over the TV remote echoing through the house just yesterday. But I didn't mind. It was what families did. As I sat down at the table, I glanced at Jessica again. Her eyes were tired, more so than usual, and I couldn't help but wonder if something was weighing on her. I chalked it up to stress. After all, we all had our moments. But she was different. She seemed more distracted these days, often lost in thought. Little things, like the way she looked at her phone too often or the way she had started working late without warning, caught my attention, but I brushed them off. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who questioned everything. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I couldn't quite hide the concern in my voice. Jessica's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something I couldn't quite place, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Yeah, just tired," she replied, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. I didn't push it. There was no reason to. We were good. Later that afternoon, I dropped the kids off at a friend's house for a sleepover. It was rare for Jessica and me to have time alone, just the 2 of us. I suggested dinner at that little Italian place downtown, a place we used to go when we first started dating. She agreed without hesitation, and I felt a flicker of excitement. It was a small thing, but it felt special, like we were reconnecting. We didn't talk much during dinner. We never really did when we were out, but there was a quiet comfort in it. I noticed how beautiful she looked in the dim light of the restaurant, the way the soft glow highlighted the curve of her neck and the faint lines around her eyes, lines that hadn't been there when we first met. But there was something else in her demeanor, something that didn't belong. As we finished dessert, I suggested we take a walk. The evening was cool, and the city was just starting to wind down. We strolled down the street hand in hand, the familiar sounds of city life filling the air. Jessica kept her distance, her fingers barely brushing mine. I wondered if it was just me, but it felt as though we were 2 people who hadn't seen each other in years, drifting in separate directions without saying a word. Then, as if out of nowhere, I felt it. The shift, the change in the air. Jessica's phone buzzed in her pocket and she quickly glanced at the screen before slipping it back into her bag. I didn't say anything, not then, but it nagged at me. The next few weeks passed in a blur of normalcy, work, family, the occasional date night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Jessica was still beautiful, still the woman I married, but there was an unease, a tension that I couldn't explain. And then one afternoon it happened. A text message appeared on her phone, a message she didn't expect me to see. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart hammering in my chest as I read the words. The message wasn't from a coworker, nor was it about work. It was something far more intimate. It was from Monica. The night I was supposed to surprise Jessica with a quiet romantic dinner turned into something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I had left the office early, eager to catch up with her, to reignite that spark we once had. She'd seemed distant lately, her focus split between work and something or someone I couldn't put my finger on. I thought maybe a night out, just the two of us, would clear the air. I was wrong. The restaurant was a cozy, dimly lit Italian place a little ways from home, a spot we used to frequent in the early days of our relationship. It had the kind of atmosphere that felt like a secret, a place to hide away from the world and just focus on each other. The hostess led me to our usual booth, but when I looked around, something about the evening felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I was just waiting for Jessica. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from her, apologizing for being late. She was stuck at work. It wasn't surprising. She'd been working late more often recently, but I didn't mind. I ordered a drink and settled in, distracted by the hum of conversations and clinking glasses around me. Then about an hour later, I saw her walk in. Only it wasn't just Jessica. She was holding hands with someone. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized her immediately. It was Monica Sullivan, the graphic designer from Jessica's company, the one who had been in and out of our lives for months now. She wasn't just a colleague, though. She had become a fixture, always at our house for dinner parties, business events, and casual get-togethers. I never thought much of her at first, but as I watched them walk toward the table hand in hand, a cold chill ran down my spine. Jessica's face lit up as she saw me, her smile wide and full of warmth. But the moment her eyes shifted to Monica, I saw something shift in her too, a flicker of uncertainty, almost as if she was caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. But it wasn't just that. It was the way they looked at each other, the way Monica's hand lingered a little too long in Jessica's, their fingers curling together in a soft, intimate hold. And when they reached the table, they didn't pull apart. Instead, they sat close, too close, their bodies leaning toward each other in a way I had never seen before. My mind raced. Was this some kind of joke? Did Jessica know I was here? Was she trying to hide something from me, or was this a setup? They sat across from me, and for a brief moment I thought about leaving, just walking out and not saying a word, but something in me froze, held me there, forcing me to stay. I had to know. I needed to see it with my own eyes. Jessica glanced up at me, her smile faltering when she realized I hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. I looked at her, trying to remain calm. She tried to hide the panic in her eyes, but it was there. It was always there now. "Hey," she said softly, her voice forced. "Gregor, I didn't know you were here already." Her words didn't make sense. I knew she didn't know I was coming early, but that wasn't what struck me. It was the subtle shift in her demeanor, the way she was trying to act as though everything was normal, even though the air around us felt electric, charged with unspoken truths. "Yeah, I thought I'd surprise you," I replied, my voice steady, though my insides were twisting. Monica smiled warmly at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't the friendly colleague I thought I knew. There was something different about her tonight, something that sent a sharp pang of unease through me. "Sorry we're late," she said, her words sweet, almost too sweet. "It was one of those nights at the office, right, Jess?" Jessica nodded, but there was no real conviction in her voice. I noticed how her hand rested on the table, inches away from Monica's, their fingers twitching slightly, like they were itching to touch again. A waiter appeared, and for the next few moments we all went through the motions of ordering food. I could barely hear the words as they spilled from my mouth, my mind too busy trying to make sense of the scene unfolding before me. I watched them interact, how they exchanged glances, how their hands brushed against each other under the table, and how Jessica's smile seemed to grow more genuine whenever Monica spoke. It was then that the truth hit me with the force of a tidal wave. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for over a decade, was in love with another woman. The shock of it stole my breath away, and for a moment I could barely hear my own heartbeat. I had suspected something, felt something off, but seeing them together like this made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. My mind snapped into focus, my body suddenly rigid as I watched them. The familiar warmth I once felt when looking at Jessica was gone, replaced by an icy void. My thoughts whirled, trying to make sense of what I had seen, but it was too much, too overwhelming. I wanted to stand up, confront them right there, demand an explanation. But I couldn't. Something kept me rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a mix of anger, confusion, and hurt. I wanted to lash out, but I didn't know how. As I looked back and forth between the two of them, I realized something else. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that they were so comfortable in each other's company, so open, so natural, that I felt like an intruder in my own marriage. Jessica noticed the silence between us and shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I couldn't look at her. Not yet. Not until I understood everything that had just been shattered in front of me. The night dragged on, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. I finished my meal without tasting a single bite, my thoughts spiraling, replaying the moment I saw them together over and over again. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. But there was something else, too, an overwhelming sense of betrayal that twisted deeper than any anger could reach. And as the night ended, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the end of everything. The perfect life I had thought we had was nothing more than an illusion, one that had crumbled in a single moment. The drive home from the restaurant was the longest of my life. The air in the car felt thick with unspoken words, yet the only sound that filled the space was the hum of the engine. Jessica sat beside me, her silence more deafening than any argument could have been. Every so often I'd glance over at her, trying to gauge her emotions, but I couldn't read her anymore, not like I used to. My mind was a blur of conflicting thoughts, each one vying for control. Part of me wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there. How could she? How long had this been going on? Did Monica even know? But another part of me, the part that had spent years building a life with Jessica, urged me to stay calm, to think this through before doing something irreversible. Jessica's eyes were fixed on the window, the faint reflection of the city lights passing by only highlighting the emptiness in her gaze. I couldn't tell if she was lost in thought or just avoiding looking at me altogether. Either way, I felt the distance between us growing larger with every passing mile. The more I thought about it, the harder it became to hold back my emotions. How had I not seen it? Was I so blind? So caught up in my work, in the comfort of our daily routine, that I failed to notice the subtle signs? The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she'd smile a little too brightly when she talked about Monica. My chest tightened with anger. This wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the physical act. It was the emotional connection between them. That was what hurt the most. We arrived home, the sound of the car engine shutting off too final, too sharp in the silence. As I turned off the ignition, I stayed in the car for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, the weight of the moment sinking in. This was it. Everything had changed. "Gregor," Jessica said quietly, her voice breaking through the tension. "Can we talk?" Her words felt hollow, like an echo of the person I thought I knew. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. How could we talk when there was so much left unsaid? I finally opened the door, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I didn't look at her as I walked into the house. My mind was racing, my emotions conflicting, each one more volatile than the last. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but there was a part of me, the part that had loved her for so long, that wanted to hear her side, wanted to believe there was some explanation that could make this make sense. But I knew deep down there was no explanation. There was no excuse for what she had done. There was no justification for the way she'd made me feel so small, so invisible in our own home. And there was certainly no explanation that would make the image of them together, hand in hand, disappear. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't look at her, couldn't look at her. Why her? I heard her move behind me, the faint sound of her footsteps approaching, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "It just happened." Her words hit me like a physical blow. It just happened. As if this was some accident, some mistake that could be swept away with a simple explanation. "That's not good enough, Jessica," I replied, my voice shaking with a mix of frustration and disbelief. How long have you been seeing her?" "6 months," she said quietly, and I felt the room spin. 6 months. It felt like a lifetime. 6 months of lies, 6 months of me being completely unaware, completely blind to the reality that was unfolding right under my nose. I turned to face her then, finally meeting her eyes. There was no apology in them, no remorse, only a silent plea for understanding. I could see the guilt written on her face, but it was too late for that. The trust was gone. It was shattered, beyond repair. You knew what this would do to me," I said, my voice growing louder, more desperate, "and you still went ahead with it." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I didn't need her explanation. I didn't want it anymore. Nothing she said would change the fact that she had chosen Monica over me, over us. I walked past her, heading for the stairs. I didn't want to hear her explanations. I didn't want to hear anything she had to say. I needed space. I needed to be alone with my thoughts. The weight of everything crashing down on me was too much to bear. Upstairs, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. Who was this man staring back at me? How had I become someone who didn't even recognize his own wife? My mind raced with thoughts of what came next. What did I do now? I felt the anger rise again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just rage. It was a deep gnawing pain, the kind that ate at you from the inside. I had loved her. I had trusted her, and now all of that seemed meaningless. For the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly alone. I didn't know how to walk into the house. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, it was like a barrier had been raised, one that neither of us could cross. The house felt different, colder, the air thicker. Jessica had followed me in, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I tried to focus on the mundane, on the little things that used to bring comfort. The way the lights flickered in the hallway, how our shoes were scattered near the door, the faint sound of the washing machine in the other room. But none of it mattered. It all felt meaningless now. The life we had built, the years of trust and love were gone, just like that. Jessica's footsteps were hesitant behind me, but I didn't turn around. Not yet. The last thing I wanted was to look at her and see the same face I had once adored. That face was a mask now, a stranger's mask. It didn't belong to the woman I thought I knew. "Gregor," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Please, we need to talk." I clenched my fists. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't want to hear why it happened. I had already seen enough. But the part of me that loved her, the part that had trusted her for so many years, wanted to hear it. I needed her to say it. I needed to know that there was a reason behind this gut-wrenching betrayal. "You want to talk?" I finally said, my voice tight, barely holding it together. I didn't look at her, just stared at the kitchen counter, the empty space where we had shared so many meals, so many moments. "You want to explain how this happened? How you and Monica, how you've been lying to me for months?" She was silent for a moment. I could feel her eyes on me, but I refused to look at her. I couldn't bear to see the guilt on her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she whispered. "It's not what you think." The words stung. How many times had I heard those words before, in other contexts? They meant nothing now. They felt hollow. "Not what I think," I scoffed, finally turning to face her. "What do you think I think, Jessica? That I'm imagining this? That I'm overreacting?" My chest tightened as the reality of it all hit me again. "I saw you with her. I saw the way you looked at her. How long has this been going on?" She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. That silence was the answer I needed. 6 months, 6 months of lies, 6 months of her pretending to be the woman I married, all while she was with Monica, all while I was being kept in the dark. "I didn't plan for it, Gregor," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I wasn't happy anymore. And she understood me." My heart twisted in my chest. It wasn't the betrayal that hit me hardest. It was the realization that she had been so unhappy, so disconnected from me, that she had found solace in someone else. I wasn't enough. "Is that what it was, Jessica?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. You weren't happy? So you turned to someone else? You didn't think about me, about us, about the kids?" She opened her mouth to speak but paused, the weight of my words sinking in. I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It just happened. It wasn't supposed to be like this." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Of course it wasn't supposed to be, but it is. It is because you made a choice. You made a decision to be with her, and I stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The anger, the hurt. It was too much for words. I wanted to scream, to tear everything apart, to make her understand the pain she had caused me. But I couldn't. I was exhausted, drained, and I knew that no amount of yelling would make her feel the weight of what she had done. "You didn't think about us," I said, my voice quieter now, filled with a deep sorrow. "You didn't think about our family, Jessica. You didn't think about how this would affect everyone, how it would destroy me." Her face crumpled at the words. I saw the tears start to form, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Not now. Not after everything. I know, Gregor," she said, her voice breaking as the tears started to fall. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the lump in my throat. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to say you're sorry when everything has already been destroyed. You had a choice, Jessica. You had so many chances to come clean, to tell me the truth, but you didn't. And now we're here." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear the faint sound of her sobbing, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I couldn't forgive her, not yet, maybe not ever. I turned away, walking toward the stairs, needing distance. I needed space to think, to process, to make sense of the reality that had just shattered my life. I had loved her. I had trusted her with everything I had. And now, I didn't know who she was anymore. "Where are you going?" she called after me, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. I needed to be alone. The night felt like it lasted an eternity. Every time I closed my eyes, images of Jessica and Monica flashed in my mind. I saw their hands intertwined, their smiles too genuine, the way their bodies leaned toward each other in that intimate, unspoken connection that should have been reserved for me. I lay awake in the dark, my mind spiraling. I had never felt so betrayed. I had always thought that if anything ever happened, I would sense it, feel it in my gut. But I didn't. I had been blind, deaf to the signs right in front of me. How had I missed it? 6 months. 6 months of lies, of secrets, and I hadn't even suspected. The disbelief kept circling in my head, over and over, each time stronger than the last. Jessica was my wife. I trusted her, and yet she had been building a life with someone else on the side. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. It wasn't just some fling. It was real. It had been real for months. I could feel the anger rising again. It simmered beneath the surface, ready to explode. But it was a different kind of anger now, one that was mixed with profound sadness. I felt hollow, as though my very essence had been torn out and replaced with a cold, heavy weight that I couldn't shake. I went downstairs, hoping to clear my head, but the house felt suffocating. I walked through the kitchen, my eyes landing on the empty chair where Jessica used to sit, her laughter echoing in my mind. Now it was just a void. There was no warmth left in this house, no life, only the cold, stark reality of what she had done. Jessica hadn't slept in our bed that night. I knew she was in the guest room, probably crying, probably wishing she could take everything back. But she couldn't. She had made her choice, and I had to accept that. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was everything else that came with it. The realization that everything I thought I knew about her was a lie. She had been pretending for so long. She had been pretending to be happy, pretending to care. All the little moments, all the conversations, the future plans we had made. It all felt like a cruel joke now. I found myself pacing, running my hands through my hair, the rage turning into something darker, something more destructive. My mind was racing in 100 different directions. Part of me wanted to confront her, to shout at her, to demand answers. But another part of me knew that no amount of words, no amount of anger could change anything. She had already chosen. I thought about the years we had spent together. the family we had built. We were supposed to grow old together. We were supposed to be a team, but that dream had shattered. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through the messages between Jessica and Monica. I had already seen enough. There was no need to dig deeper, but something pulled me in. Something made me want to see it, to understand just how far things had gone. The messages were casual at first, about work, about trivial things, but as I scrolled further, I saw it. The flirtation, the subtle but undeniable hints. Words that once seemed innocent now felt like daggers, each message another betrayal. And then there it was, clear as day. I can't wait to see you again tonight. You make me feel things I never thought I would. I threw the phone down in disgust, my hand shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. She had been telling me she was tired, telling me that everything was fine, all the while hiding this from me. How could she do this? How could she look me in the eye every day and lie to me? How could she pretend like everything was okay when she was sharing her heart with someone else? I wanted to confront her right then, to demand the truth. But the words wouldn't come. All I could feel was a pit in my stomach, a deep emptiness that seemed to consume everything. Jessica was downstairs now, standing in the doorway, watching me. I didn't hear her approach. She must have heard me throw the phone. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I never meant for any of this to happen." I didn't look at her. I couldn't. If I did, I was afraid I might do something I would regret. "You never meant for this to happen?" I finally muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is that your excuse? That it just happened?" She took a step forward, her hands outstretched, but I stepped back. "No," I said, the word coming out harsher than I intended. Don't come near me." I could see the tears in her eyes now. She was falling apart, and a small part of me wanted to comfort her, wanted to tell her everything would be okay. But I couldn't. I couldn't find it in me to forgive her, not yet. "Please," she begged. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you." "You already did," I replied, my voice shaking. "You hurt me more than you could ever understand." She sank to her knees in front of me, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. But I just stood there, staring at her. I didn't know what to feel anymore. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. And in her place was someone who had broken me in ways I didn't know I could be broken. How could I ever look at her the same way again? How could I ever trust her again? "I need time," I finally said, my voice hoarse. "I need time to think." She looked up at me, eyes red from crying. "Please don't leave me, Gregor. Please don't leave." I didn't say anything. I couldn't say anything. I turned and walked away, leaving her on the floor alone. The morning after the confrontation, I woke up with a hollow feeling in my chest. The night had been restless, filled with nightmares of betrayal of the life I thought I had, and now the reality that it was slipping through my fingers. I had tried to sleep, but all I could do was replay the past few days over and over in my mind, each thought heavier than the last. I needed to make a decision. Jessica had begged me for forgiveness, told me she was sorry. Those were words I had heard too many times. But the damage had been done. The trust was gone. It didn't matter how many apologies she gave me, how many tears she shed. This wasn't a mistake. It was a conscious decision she made. And I wasn't sure I could ever look at her the same way again. I spent the day pacing, thinking. What was the next step? I was trapped in a haze of hurt and disbelief, but the logical part of my mind was beginning to piece things together. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't stay in a marriage where trust had been shattered beyond repair. I made the call that afternoon. "Hello, is this Mr. Thompson? I need to schedule a consultation." The voice on the other end was professional, calm. It was everything I wasn't in that moment. But hearing that voice, knowing that I was taking the first step toward ending everything, made my heart race. The woman I had married was no longer the person standing before me. She had been replaced by someone else, a stranger. The next day, I sat in the lawyer's office, the weight of my decision hanging over me. Mr. Thompson was an older man, sharp, with a quiet demeanor that made me feel like I was talking to someone who had seen it all before. He listened as I explained the situation, carefully taking notes, his eyes never leaving mine. I told him everything, about the affair, about Jessica's betrayal, about how it had destroyed me inside. "You're not the first," he said calmly when I finished. "Infidelity is, unfortunately, not uncommon in divorce cases." I didn't know how to respond to that. It wasn't comforting. It didn't make me feel better knowing that I was one of many. I was still here, sitting across from him, feeling like my life had fallen apart. "We can explore your options," he continued. "You have the right to file for divorce on grounds of infidelity. It's a no-fault state, but infidelity can influence custody arrangements and division of assets." I didn't want to think about the logistics of it all. I didn't want to consider the financial implications, the legal battles that lay ahead. All I wanted was for the pain to stop, but I knew deep down that it wouldn't. There was no quick fix for what had happened. "What about custody?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "The kids. I want to make sure they're safe in all this." He nodded, writing something down. "That will be the focus in your case. The children's well-being will always be the primary concern. We can work on ensuring that you have primary custody if that's your wish." The thought of losing my kids, of them being caught in the crossfire of this mess, hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had never imagined that this would be my reality. I had always been the one who took care of them, who made sure they were okay. Now, the thought of sharing custody with Jessica, of her being a part-time mother, felt wrong. I had to fight for them. I had to make sure they wouldn't grow up in the middle of this mess. Mr. Thompson continued discussing the process, the paperwork, the next steps, but I wasn't listening. My mind was elsewhere, imagining a future where I was no longer with Jessica, a future where I could rebuild, where I could breathe without the constant weight of betrayal pressing down on me. But even then, a small part of me still hesitated. I had been with Jessica for so long. We had built a life together, a family. How could I just throw it all away? How could I destroy everything we had worked for, even if she had destroyed it first? The lawyer's voice broke through my thoughts. "You don't have to make any decisions today, but I suggest you take some time to think about everything before moving forward. Divorce is a big step, and it's important that you're sure." I nodded absently, but the words didn't comfort me. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I wasn't sure I could forgive her, and I wasn't sure I could live with the person she had become. I left the office with a heavy heart, the decision still hanging in the air. But the path ahead was clearer now. I had the power to end this. I had the power to walk away from a marriage that no longer felt like mine. When I returned home that evening, Jessica was waiting for me. I could see it in her eyes, the same fear, the same desperation. She knew what was coming, even if I hadn't said a word. She was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away, but I was already too far gone. "I made an appointment," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "I'm starting the process." Her face paled and she took a step toward me, but I held up my hand. "It's over, Jessica. I can't do this anymore." Her expression faltered, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of the woman I once loved, but it was fleeting, lost in the shadow of the woman she had become. She nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The silence between us was enough. It had been a few days since I had made the decision to start the divorce process. Jessica had retreated into herself, barely speaking to me. The silence between us was a constant reminder of the breach in everything we had once shared. But in those quiet moments, my thoughts were consumed by one question. How deep did this go? How long had she been lying to me? And more importantly, what was her connection to Monica? I spent the following days distracted, fixated on one thing. Kate, the woman who had torn apart my life and didn't even know me. I had heard her name before, of course. She was Jessica's colleague, her close friend. But now, in the midst of the betrayal, her name had become synonymous with my pain. She was the other woman, the one who had been sharing my wife's time, her emotions, her love, and I needed to understand how far this affair really went. It wasn't like me to dig through other people's private lives, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know, I had to find out if there were things I had missed, things Jessica hadn't told me. So one night, after putting the kids to bed, I decided to do what I had never imagined myself doing. I went through Jessica's phone. I had done it before, of course, when she was late, when she'd left it lying around, but never like this. This time, it wasn't about checking a text or looking at a phone bill. This time, it was about uncovering the truth, peeling back the layers of lies that had built up around me. The phone buzzed once, and I picked it up, my heart racing as I unlocked it. The first few messages were nothing, work emails, texts about the kids, but then there were the others, the ones I hadn't seen before, the ones from Kate. I scrolled through the messages, my eyes growing wider as I read. It wasn't just flirtation anymore. There were words exchanged that made my stomach turn. I miss you. Can't wait to see you again. What would Greg say if he knew? It felt like a punch to the gut. Not only had Jessica been betraying me with someone, but it seemed she was also emotionally involved. These weren't just late-night rendezvous or secretive meetings. This was a relationship, something real, something that went beyond the physical. But then came the message that stung the most. It was from Kate. I love you, Jess. I never meant for this to happen, but I can't imagine my life without you. I froze. I love you. The words echoed in my mind, the weight of them suffocating me. Jessica had fallen in love with her. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was love. It was everything I had feared, everything that deep down I knew was true, but didn't want to admit. The tears that filled my eyes weren't just from the hurt. They were from the realization that the person I thought I knew, the woman I thought I had loved, had been someone else entirely. I had been living with a stranger. She had given herself to someone else, and it wasn't a simple mistake. It was a choice. She had chosen Kate over and over, knowing what it would do to me, to our family. I slammed the phone down on the kitchen counter, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. How had I not seen this? How had I not known? The clues had been there, hadn't they? The late nights, the sudden distance, the way she had stopped being our Jessica and started becoming herself, someone else. But I had dismissed it. I had convinced myself that everything was fine. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was sit there staring at the phone, the messages that had destroyed everything. When Jessica came down the stairs a few minutes later, she must have seen the look on my face. The guilt was written all over her. She knew. "Gregor," she said softly, standing in the doorway, not daring to come any closer. "We need to talk." My voice was cold, devoid of emotion. "How long, Jessica?" I asked, my voice low, threatening to break. "How long has this been going on?" She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, her eyes flickering to the phone on the counter. She knew what I had seen. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," she began, but I cut her off. "How long?" I repeated, my fists clenched at my sides. "How long have you been in love with her?" She took a shaky breath, stepping forward as though she might touch me, but I stepped back. 6 months, she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far, Gregor. It just happened." 6 months. The truth hit me like a tidal wave. 6 months of living a lie. 6 months of her choosing Kate, of her sneaking around behind my back, pretending everything was fine. I felt sick to my stomach. "You never meant for it to go this far?" I asked bitterly. "You didn't mean for me to find out, right? You didn't mean to tear our lives apart." But here we are. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice pleading. "But it's too late, isn't it?" I didn't answer. The truth was too raw, too painful. There was nothing left to say. I had seen everything I needed to. She had been living a double life, and no amount of apologies could undo the damage. I turned away from her, walking toward the door. "I can't do this anymore, Jessica. I can't live in a house full of lies." As I stepped out, the weight of the betrayal still crushing me, I realized just how deep the wound had gone. This wasn't just an affair. This was everything. My entire life, my entire world had been built on a lie. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it consumed me. The discovery of Jessica's betrayal had been overwhelming, but the silence that followed was even worse. We lived under the same roof, barely exchanging words. The thought of what she had done, of who she had become, gnawed at me, relentless and cold. But the name that echoed in my mind the most wasn't hers. It was Kate. I needed to know everything about her. Kate was the name that felt like it was haunting me, a phantom that lingered in the corners of my mind. Jessica had always spoken of her fondly, her close friend, her partner in work. I'd never thought anything of it before, but now that name held so much weight. It wasn't just another person anymore. Kate had taken something that didn't belong to her, and I needed to understand who she was, what she was to Jessica, and how deep this affair really went. That evening I sat down with a bottle of bourbon. It wasn't the healthiest decision, but I didn't care. The burn of the alcohol was the only thing that numbed the feeling in my chest. I poured myself another drink, then grabbed Jessica's phone, which she had left on the kitchen counter. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to invade her privacy, to dig deeper into the mess that had already shattered our lives. But the urge was unbearable. I had to know. I unlocked her phone without hesitation. The text messages were the first thing I saw. At first there was nothing unusual, just casual work-related exchanges between Jessica and Kate. But as I scrolled further down, something shifted. A text from Kate caught my eye. "I miss you so much. When can I see you again? I can't stop thinking about you." I froze. It wasn't the message itself, it was the way it made me feel, like I was an intruder in a secret I wasn't meant to uncover. How had this gone so far? I scrolled further. Another message. "I love you, Jess. I never expected this, but I can't imagine my life without you now." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I love you." 3 simple words that shattered everything. This wasn't just an affair, it wasn't just a mistake. Jessica had fallen in love with Kate, and now I realized that my entire world had been a lie. The woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew, had found something in Kate that she couldn't find with me. I set the phone down, suddenly dizzy. My breath came faster. I tried to steady myself, but it didn't help. I thought I could handle the truth, but now that I was seeing it, reading it, hearing it, it was too much. Too much to digest in one sitting. I needed space, time to process, to understand what had been going on behind my back, to fully grasp the extent of this betrayal. I couldn't face Jessica right now. I didn't sleep much that night. The phone, the messages, the words, "I love you," kept running through my mind. I felt like I was drowning in them. Jessica wasn't the woman I had thought she was. She wasn't even close. She had given her heart to someone else, and I had been blind to it. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to confront her again. The silence between us was suffocating, but the truth in those messages felt like it had changed everything. I couldn't go on pretending that nothing had happened. When I found her in the kitchen later that day, I could tell she had been crying. Her eyes were red, her face pale, but there was something else there too. Guilt. "Gregor," she said quietly, her voice shaky, "we need to talk." I had already talked to her, over and over. I had tried to understand, tried to make sense of her actions, but no words could undo the damage. "How long, Jessica?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "How long has it been going on with her?" Her gaze faltered, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. She couldn't answer. She didn't need to. "I saw the messages," I continued, my voice low. "I saw everything. I know what you've been hiding from me. I know how deep this goes." She flinched, stepping back as though my words physically hurt her. "I never wanted you to find out this way," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I said, the words more bitter than I intended. "You lied to me. You deceived me for months, Jess. 6 months. How long did you think you could get away with it?" She stopped herself, her chest rising and falling rapidly as if she couldn't find the words. "I didn't want to hurt you, I swear, it just—" She broke off, unable to finish the sentence. "It just— What?" I pressed, my voice shaking with anger. "You fell in love with her, and you kept pretending to be someone else with me. You kept lying to my face." The tears in her eyes were real, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy for her. Not after everything. Not after finding out that she had chosen Kate over me. "I didn't know what to do," she said, her voice a mixture of desperation and guilt. "I was confused. I didn't want to lose you, but I didn't know how to stop feeling what I felt for her." I stared at her, the weight of her confession hanging between us. I couldn't even look at her anymore. I didn't know who she was. "I can't do this anymore, Jessica," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I can't be with someone who's in love with someone else." She took a shaky breath, the tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry, Gregor, I am, but it's too late. I've already done too much. You won't ever look at me the same way again." "No," I replied softly, "I won't." And for the first time, I walked away. The day I made the decision to divorce Jessica wasn't one single moment. It wasn't a sudden, explosive realization. It was the culmination of months of heartache, of slowly coming to terms with the fact that the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, was gone. In her place was someone else, someone I didn't recognize, someone who had taken everything I trusted and shattered it. For weeks I had gone back and forth in my mind, replaying every argument, every moment of doubt. Could I forgive her? Could I ever look at her the same way again? Could we rebuild? Every time I thought I had an answer, it would slip away like water through my fingers. The truth was, the love I had for her was now tainted, irreparably so, and what was left of that love had long since evaporated. I had tried to make sense of it all. I had gone to therapy, read articles, talked to friends who'd been through similar situations, but nothing could prepare me for the day when I realized that the woman I had committed myself to had never really been mine. She had fallen in love with someone else, and no amount of explanations or apologies could undo the years of betrayal. That afternoon, I sat across from my lawyer, staring at the papers in front of me. Divorce papers. They weren't the solution to all my problems, but they were the first step in reclaiming some sense of control over my life. "Are you sure about this?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice neutral, giving me room to back out if I wanted to. But I didn't want to back out anymore. The decision had been made. I had exhausted every possible way to fix things, every avenue of reconciliation, and in the end, nothing had changed. I looked at the papers, the reality of it sinking in. The words irreconcilable differences stared back at me, mocking my once perfect life. How could I have been so blind? How could I have not seen it? How could Jessica have hidden all of this, knowing the damage it would cause? "Yes," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm sure." Mr. Thompson nodded and began outlining the next steps, how we would divide the assets, how the custody arrangement would work. But none of it mattered. Not really. The house, the cars, the bank accounts, none of it could replace what I had lost. None of it could make this any easier. As I walked out of the office, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't peace, not exactly, but it was something, a sense of finality. I was done pretending. I was done fighting for a marriage that no longer existed. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet. Jessica wasn't in the living room, and the kids weren't back from their playdate yet. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe without the weight of anger or betrayal hanging over me. I knew what I had to do, and it wasn't going to be easy. But it was the only way forward. Jessica came home just before dinner. She walked in, her eyes immediately searching for me, for some sign that things could go back to normal. But there was no going back, not anymore. "Gregor," she said softly, standing in the doorway, hesitating before she took a step inside. Her voice was tentative, fragile, like she knew what was coming but couldn't quite accept it. "We need to talk." I didn't meet her eyes at first. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I looked at her, I might lose my resolve, might give in to whatever apology she had prepared. But the truth had already set in. The decision had been made. "I've made an appointment with a mediator," I said, my voice low but firm. "We'll need to figure out the details for the divorce. Custody, assets, everything." Her face dropped. I could see the shock in her eyes, the disbelief. "Divorce?" she whispered, like the word itself hurt her. I nodded, finally meeting her gaze. There was no anger in me now, no hatred. Just the overwhelming sadness of what had happened, of what we had become. "Yes, Jessica, divorce. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it isn't." She took a step toward me, her hands trembling. "Please, Gregor, don't. We can fix this. We can—" "No." I cut her off, shaking my head. "We can't. You broke my trust, Jess. You destroyed everything. I can't pretend that I'm okay with this anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I had done that already, too many times. Now it was my turn to take control of my own life. You're really going to do this?" she asked, her voice breaking as though she couldn't believe it. As if there was some part of her still holding on to hope that I would forgive her, that I would forget everything that had happened. "I'm done," I said, the finality in my voice making it clear. "I'm done with the lies, done with the pretending. You made your choices, Jessica. Now I have to make mine." She collapsed into the chair, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I'm so sorry, Gregor," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not now, not when everything between us had turned into this. "I know you're sorry," I said, my voice softer now, but there was no going back. "But sorry isn't enough anymore." She sat there, tears falling freely, while I turned and walked away. There was nothing left to say. The decision had been made and nothing could change it. The chapter of our lives together was over, and I knew deep down that it was the only way to start rebuilding my life. Without her, it was a strange feeling, walking into the clinic that day. It wasn't the sterile smell or the coldness of the walls. It wasn't the formal greetings from the nurses or the constant hum of machines that filled the air. It was the weight of the decision, the heaviness that settled in my chest when I realized that I was about to be asked to make a choice that would define me, maybe for the rest of my life. The phone call had come a few days before. The clinic had informed me that I was a match for a bone marrow donation. It was a call most people would be grateful for, an opportunity to save a life. The woman on the other end had sounded so hopeful, so full of promise that I might be able to help someone in need. But there was something else gnawing at me, something that I hadn't been able to shake since that day when I first discovered Jessica's betrayal. It was the realization that the person who needed the bone marrow wasn't just some anonymous stranger. It was Kate. My mind had gone blank the moment I connected the dots. Kate, the woman who had stolen my wife from me, the woman who had shattered my family. The thought of her, of all the pain she had caused, stirred something inside of me, something I didn't know how to control. I had spent the past few weeks grappling with the fact that Jessica and I were through. The divorce was in motion. The kids were caught in the middle, and every interaction with Jessica felt like it was drenched in the weight of what had been broken. But now, this donation, this decision was different. I sat there in the waiting room, my heart racing. I couldn't understand why this felt so impossible, why it felt like such a betrayal to even consider helping Kate. She had taken my wife from me. She had been the one to make Jessica feel things that I couldn't provide anymore. And now I was supposed to save her life? It seemed insane. It was insane. I had heard people talk about forgiveness before, how it was freeing, how it lifted the burden. But how could I forgive someone who had so effortlessly torn apart my life? How could I forgive someone who had taken my trust, my family, and turned it all into dust? I thought about the kids, about Lisa and Ben, about how they needed me to be strong, to make decisions that would show them that even in the face of unimaginable pain, you could rise above it. But this wasn't about being strong. This wasn't about making the right choice for them. This was about me and my ability, or lack of, to forgive. I didn't know if I could ever forgive Kate, or Jessica for that matter. Maybe forgiveness was something you worked toward, something you could only achieve after years of healing. But right now, I couldn't even look at Kate without the burning desire to make her feel what I had felt. The devastation, the complete collapse of everything I thought I knew about love and trust. The nurse came out and called my name, and for a second I didn't move. My legs felt like lead, my mind racing, caught between the part of me that wanted to help, that wanted to be the better person, and the part of me that screamed for justice, for some kind of consequence. I stood up, my hands shaking as I followed her to the back. She explained the process, the risks, the details, but I wasn't really listening. I was too lost in my own head, too consumed by the thought of what I was being asked to do. When she left to prepare the paperwork, I sat alone, my mind working through everything. I thought about the years with Jessica, the family we had built, the love I had given. I thought about the day I found out about her affair, the night I realized everything I had believed in was a lie. I thought about the way Kate had stood by, her presence in our lives so innocent at first, but slowly, piece by piece, she had woven herself into Jessica's heart, into my marriage, until nothing remained. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what it would feel like to help her, to save her, and all I could see was the image of her face, the face of the woman who had betrayed me. The nurse returned, holding the clipboard waiting for my decision. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't look at anyone. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice tight. "I can't do it." She didn't ask any more questions, didn't push me for an explanation. She just nodded, her expression sympathetic, and left the room. I sat there for a long time, the decision heavy in my chest, but the relief that followed was undeniable. I couldn't help Kate, not now, not when everything inside me still felt raw and broken, not when the idea of helping the woman who had caused me so much pain seemed like an impossible thing to bear. I wasn't ready to forgive her. Maybe I never would be. And that was okay. It had been months since I walked out of the marriage, months since I had made the decision to stop pretending. But even now, I could feel the strain of it all. The emotional toll that had seeped into every aspect of my life wasn't something I could easily shake off. It was there, lurking in the corners of my mind, a constant reminder of everything I had lost. I had tried to move on, to rebuild. I had met people, dated occasionally, but nothing ever felt right. I wasn't sure if I was ready to open up to someone new, but the loneliness was suffocating. Still, every time I thought about starting something real, a wall went up, and I retreated into myself. How could I trust again? How could I let anyone close when the person I had trusted the most had shattered everything? Allison had been a steady presence in my life. She had been there for me after the divorce, offering a comforting ear when I needed to vent, a steady hand when I needed to lean on someone. She had been patient with me, understanding when I pulled away, when I didn't want to talk about my past. She was good to me, and I knew I had feelings for her. But every time things started to feel serious, the ghosts of my past reappeared. The emotional scars I had buried beneath the surface came rushing to the forefront, and I found myself pushing her away. The truth was, I wasn't ready for a new relationship. Not yet. I wasn't healed. I had convinced myself that I was fine, that I could move forward, but the truth was too raw to ignore. The betrayal I had experienced still haunted me, and no matter how much I cared for Allison, I couldn't give her what she deserved. I couldn't give her my heart when it was still broken. She could tell. She could see the way I withdrew, the way I hesitated whenever things got too close, too intimate. And for the first time, we were talking about it, really talking about it. "I'm not asking for you to forget what happened," Allison said one night, her voice soft but firm. "But you need to stop letting it control you. You deserve more than living in the shadows of your past." Her words cut deeper than I wanted them to. I had spent so much time convincing myself that I could move forward, that I could start over, but the pain was still there, festering beneath the surface. "I'm not ready, Allison," I said, my voice thick with regret. "I don't know when I'll be, and I don't want to hurt you in the process." She nodded slowly, her eyes searching mine for some kind of answer, some kind of reassurance that this wasn't the end. "I get it," she said quietly, "but you need to heal. You need to let go of the past. If you don't, it'll keep holding you back and it'll ruin everything, even the good things." I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words sink in. I had spent so much time blaming myself, blaming Jessica, blaming Kate, but I hadn't realized that the person I needed to forgive the most was myself. I had been so consumed by the betrayal, by the anger, that I had never taken the time to heal. I hadn't allowed myself the space to mourn the life I had lost, the trust that had been shattered, and the family that no longer existed. It wasn't just about forgiving Jessica or Kate. It was about forgiving myself for letting it happen, for not seeing the signs, for not trusting my instincts. I had blamed myself for so long, thinking that I had done something wrong, that I wasn't enough. But the truth was, I couldn't control what Jessica chose to do. I couldn't control her actions, and I couldn't keep letting her decisions destroy my life. Allison was right. I needed to heal. I needed to focus on me for once, to rebuild the pieces of myself that had been broken. I couldn't carry this baggage into a new relationship. I couldn't expect someone else to fix me when I wasn't ready to fix myself. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice heavy with emotion. "I need time to figure things out, to work through everything. I care about you, Allison, I really do. But I can't be the person you deserve until I'm whole again." She reached out, her hand gently resting on mine. "Take the time you need," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere, but you need to do this for yourself, Gregor, for your peace of mind." The weight in my chest lightened, just a little. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road to healing was long, and it wasn't something I could rush. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. It wasn't going to be perfect, and I didn't expect it to be. But I could start with forgiving myself, with giving myself the grace I had been denying for so long. And maybe, just maybe, I could begin to heal enough to open my heart again, to love without fear, to trust without reservation. But for now, I had to focus on me, and that was enough. The tension in the air was suffocating. I had known this day was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. The phone call with my sister earlier had made everything real again. Tracy's affair, the lies, the fallout. Family gatherings were never simple, but this time, it felt like everything had changed. The last thing I wanted was for my family to be caught in the crossfire of Tracy's betrayal, but I knew that hiding the truth would only complicate things further. I had spent the past few months rebuilding my life, focusing on the future, but every time I saw Tracy, something inside me tightened. She was no longer the woman I had known. She was the woman who had deceived me, the woman who had chosen someone else over everything we had built together. And now, I was expected to face my family and pretend everything was normal. That wasn't going to happen. The family dinner was planned for Sunday. My daughters, my parents, aunts, and uncles. It was supposed to be a simple gathering, a chance for us to all reconnect, but it felt more like a ticking time bomb. Tracy was still part of the picture. She had been trying to stay involved with the kids, trying to salvage whatever shred of relationship we had left. But I couldn't ignore what had happened. I couldn't pretend it wasn't eating away at me. I had made my decision. The truth needed to be out there, no matter how painful it was. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting my kids from the lies that had been woven around them. They needed to know the reality, the whole truth, because I couldn't have them growing up in a world where everything felt like a facade. As I prepared for the dinner, my mind was already racing. How would Tracy react when I told them? How could I possibly explain the extent of her betrayal to my family without it spiraling into something uncontrollable? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I couldn't keep the truth hidden any longer. When I arrived at the family's house, I was greeted by the usual warm smiles, the laughter that I once found comforting but now felt like a distant memory. Everyone was in high spirits, oblivious to the storm that had been brewing behind closed doors. Tracy was already there, sitting at the table with my parents. She smiled at me, trying to act as if nothing had changed, but I saw through it. Her eyes were nervous, constantly shifting, and I knew that she was just as aware of the tension in the air as I was. I sat down beside her, and for a brief moment, I considered backing out, keeping the truth to myself a little longer. But as I looked around the table at the people who had supported me through everything, I realized that hiding it would only cause more damage in the long run. They deserved to know what had happened. They deserved to understand the gravity of the situation. I took a deep breath, looking at Tracy one last time before speaking. "I need to tell all of you something," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "Something that Tracy and I have been hiding from everyone for months." The room fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for me to continue, but I was unsure of where to start. The weight of it all felt too much to bear in that moment. But I couldn't stop now. "I found out about Tracy's affair," I said, each word tasting like acid in my mouth. "She's been involved with someone else for a while now. I don't know all the details, but I know enough to say that everything we had is gone." Tracy's face drained of color, her hands trembling as she tried to reach out to me. But I held up my hand, signaling that I needed to speak my truth. "This isn't easy for me to say," I continued, my voice thick with emotion, "but it's the reality we're facing now. Tracy has chosen someone else over our family, over our marriage, and it's not just about infidelity anymore. It's about trust, and it's about the fact that everything I thought I knew has been shattered." The room was still. No one spoke, no one moved. The silence stretched on, and I could see the shock in my family's eyes as they processed what I had just revealed. Tracy was now looking at the floor, her face flushed with shame. I could see her trying to hold it together, trying to make herself appear unaffected, but the truth was undeniable. She had betrayed me, and there was no going back from that. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" my mother asked softly, her voice laced with concern. She had always been the one to hold the family together, the one who protected us from everything, but this was different. "I didn't know how," I replied honestly. "I didn't know how to say it, how to explain the pain, the betrayal, everything that's been happening. But now I can't pretend anymore. You all deserve to know the truth." My father, usually the quiet one, spoke up. "What's done is done, Gregor. But we're here for you, always have been, and we'll support you no matter what." I nodded, the weight of his words giving me a small sense of comfort, but the damage had already been done. There was no undoing what Tracy had done, no way to fix the broken pieces. The dinner continued in a strained silence. Tracy tried to salvage the evening by making small talk, but it was clear that no one was really listening. Everyone knew what had been said, and the undercurrent of tension was impossible to ignore. My parents were kind, offering me support, but the elephant in the room couldn't be ignored. The truth had been spoken, and nothing would ever be the same. As the night wore on, I realized just how much I had been holding back. The pain of the betrayal, the anger that still simmered beneath the surface, and the exhaustion of pretending everything was fine. But in a strange way, letting my family in, letting them see the reality of what had happened, was a release. I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. The truth had finally been set free, and it was time to start healing. What do you think of Gregor's journey and his decision to confront the truth about Tracy's affair? From which region are you watching this video? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. Don't forget to check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen.